Thank you for watching the Sustainability Chat. The Sustainability Institute is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Our mission is to catalyze sustainable action in the Seven Rivers region through educating about local sustainability issues and solutions, advocating for climate and sustainable action, connecting like-minded organizations and people to each other, and inspiring a positive vision for a sustainable future. We hope you check out all of our programs and events, like our Sustainability Chats, Green Goose Chase, Earth Fair, and the Inspiring Sustainability Awards. The Sustainability Institute free programming is only available thanks to our generous supporters. If you find what we do meaningful, please consider donating today by heading to our website, sustaininstitute.com. Once there, you can find information by clicking the Become a Member or Donate button at the top of the page. Support at any level is greatly appreciated, and your contribution is tax deductible. We especially want to thank our highest tier members, including our committed advocates and cheering champions. Thank you. Now on to today's Sustainability Chat with Beth Piggush on land justice.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Sustainability Chat. I'm Casey Meehan. I help run programming for the Sustainability Institute. And if you're not familiar with what we do, we really try to amplify voices in the Driftless region that are doing some interesting and innovative sustainability work. And we usually frame all of our work around the UN Global Goals for Sustainable Development. Now, those goals are sometimes called the Good Life Goals. And they are 17 interrelated goals that focus on addressing the world's biggest challenges, including inequity, poverty, and climate change. And really taken together, all those goals, if we advance on them, can move us towards the sustainable, thriving communities that we all want. Now, usually what we do with our sustainability chats is try to frame a chat around one particular goal. But we found it really hard to do this with today's guest, Beth Piggush. Beth is a sustainability leader that has addressed many of these goals over her career. So she's got 20 years of experience with all sorts of sustainability topics. Beth is certified as a LEED accredited professional. She's completed the National Sustainable Building Advisor Program, but she also has expertise in clean energy and energy efficient technologies, green buildings, climate change, pollution prevention, water resource management, land use management, local food and school gardens, and developing and implementing sustainability programs and environmental policy outreach. So really a wide range of expertise and experience around sustainability. But what we're interested in learning more about from Beth is her recent work in land justice. So we're going to learn a little bit about what that means and what it looks like here in the Driftless region. So Beth, I would invite you to pop your video on and join us for today's sustainability chat. So thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Casey. Thanks for having me.
You bet, you bet. So Beth, just to start off with here, what is land justice? And, how would you describe it to someone who maybe hasn't heard that term before, somebody who's brand new to thinking about this concept?
Sure. Land justice was a really new concept to me 3 years ago. I'd heard about climate justice, and I've heard about social justice and environmental justice. And you shared the the long history that I've had in working in an environmental field. And land justice has really been at the intersection of protecting land and looking at the equity of access to land, and then what it means to regenerate and bring the ecological, soil, environmental health of land and that care of land all together. So to me, there's like 3 pillars of land justice that has to come all together in one solid unit if we're really thinking about land justice in a core way.
And so why? Why is land justice important, and especially why now?
Well, I think it's always been important. It's been something that has been, I think, in our circles. And, I think if you and I have been having conversations for years, there's always been language that's been there, and it's something that has been, is it global warming? Is it climate change? And land justice, just as I said, there's been climate justice and social justice and environmental justice. Land justice with our social movements as of late is really something that has been giving it a voice that brings together the communities that have a need to get that elevation, especially those that do not normally have the voice. And when we want to have everyone in the circle and everyone having that experience and knowing that we have knowledge to bring and knowledge to gain, the land justice lens offers that opportunity for those that want to protect land, those that want to enjoy land, those that want to have access to land.
So can you give some examples of land justice initiatives around here, maybe things that you've worked on?
Sure. Actually, I really want to tell you a quick story, if I can, about
Please, yeah.
just sharing the land justice study of like the examples. Very recently, last semester, I was able to work with Alyssa Remsburg and some UWL students. And in one of the environmental studies classes, we had a project together in which the students did research at UWL to find nationally what some examples of land justice and land transfers for rematriation could be across the country. And I think that opened up their eyes of what is happening in the sense of land justice and just transfers of having properties go back to tribal nations, and that's part of land justice. And locally within a land justice lens, we have very specifically the organization that I work for currently is the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. And through that lens of land justice, we are working with a lot of different groups from Montessori to Hmong gardeners and with the youth services of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And together we are creating a kind of microcosm of access and activity to offer that equity piece for access to land, but then also working on opportunities to regenerate the land, protect it, and bringing that together has been one key example. There's also other examples that have different parts of that pillar with the different land trusts. We have our great state and national organizations that are working on protection and regeneration and equity access. We have our national and state working with our universities that are working on opportunities to bring that together with different programs and then other nonprofits as well.
So it sounds like this is a little bit like conservation work that's been done in the past, but through Knowles fellow or the Knowles program and things like that in Wisconsin. But it sounds like there's an added layer of access equity. And what else am I missing? So tell me a little bit about like what does access equity actually mean? And then how does this land justice movement differ than some of the conservation movements that have happened in the past?
So I would say for me, what differs is the fact that when you are in the process of understanding land justice, with my experience, it's been truly understanding whose land you are on and also understanding how people have been dispossessed of that land or displaced from that land. So, whether you're in the United States and the South, and there have been communities of Black farmers that were displaced, or if you've been in this region and our Ho-Chunk neighbors were displaced over time, that understanding is part of the land justice journey. And I think that is something that's been missed recently with all of our conservation efforts. And it's only just coming into play that we need to understand who the original caretakers of these lands that we all love so much, who the caretakers have been, what the practices were and how we can incorporate all of those people into these places that we love together and think of a way for future. So if you think of the concept of 7 generations, how 7 generations previous and looking at 7 generations ahead, what we need to do to protect these places that we love, especially in the Driftless region.
So yeah, say a little bit more then about like the program that the specific program you were talking about with, bringing in the Ho Chunk Youth and FSPA and, all these really disparate entities. How are they working together and on what type of access issues and how do people through land justice, how are people accessing the land differently?
Yeah, I want to take a step back and just kind of tell a little bit of the story of how we connected. A number of years ago, I think maybe 4 years ago at this point in time, the UWL student, I believe, did a story on the Franciscan sisters and approached the congregation and said, "Did you know that you were part of a boarding school in northern Wisconsin?" And that really opened the eyes of the sisters, which they knew they were part of.
And
But
actually, just to help our listeners, can you just tell us what a boarding school is?
sure, and this is a lot of heavy information, Casey. Um, a boarding school was a national school in the 1800s in which the federal government took indigenous students, children from their families, and put them into schools run by the federal government. And some of those teachers then were of religious orders or federal teachers, and the children were displaced from their families. And essentially, they were taken from their communities. They were losing their culture. They were off of the land that they had grown up with. And what the federal government was doing was taking everything that these children knew, the pathways of life and culture, and putting in the colonized way, the white way in which to live and work, and separating the communities so that there could be more dominance. And this was also a result of the original treaties to have more of a land grab with the federal government from when we first had colonizers on this country and this island we call Turtle Island in indigenous cultures. So it's a lot of information. So when I say the FSPA ran a boarding school in northern Wisconsin, they had St. Mary's Boarding School on the Bad River Reservation in northern Wisconsin. And when a student was doing a project on that and approached the sisters, that really opened up a new opportunity for the sisters to understand the trauma and harm that they were part of. But then through this lens of land justice, the opportunities to do what the study requires of whose land that they've been on, the places that they've done good social ministries with, but then also what are the opportunities going forward as they understand, they know conservation, they know regeneration, they've worked on social equity, but as the congregation is becoming smaller, how do they prepare for property planning? How can they look to the future and figure out what they've been part of in the past, know that they can do something now and plan better for the future, thinking about what they know can be better and better together. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So what does that look like?
Well, that's a big question. There's still a lot of study. And what it looks like right now is relationship. And that's where we've started. We've done study, we continue to do study. Everyone is at a different pace. And when I say relationship, it's relationship with the land and it's relationship with each other. So, very locally, it started with a relationship with myself and I'll say my friend and mentor, Henry Greengrass, who is the director of youth services at the La Crosse Ho Chunk office. And Henry and I met once and we kept meeting, and he really worked with me to understand how the students had lost their connection because their parents and their parents' parents and even their parents lost a connection to land because they were in boarding schools. So if his current students were part of any projects on the land now, we needed to know what happened then and be conscious of that and be gentle with those reintroductions. And that's exactly what we've done. We've built relationships. We've had to build trust back together. And we've looked at opportunities that have been able to build that trust. So, one of the very first things we've done together, and actually we're doing it next week or this month, is maple syrup. And what a very traditional method within Indigenous cultures in the Northeast and Upper Midwest with the maple trees. We started tapping trees with the Ho Chunk youth and some of our sisters and other members of the greater FSPA community. Tapped the trees, collect the sap, and then spent a few days together, literally sitting around the fire, getting to know each other, boiling down the sap, and then bottling it up and having meals together. And that was the relationship with a connection to a place and to land and the trees in Thanksgiving that has then progressed into other opportunities for us to build relationships. We now have a Three Sisters garden together on St. Joseph Ridge on the land that the sisters have. We've done
Could you explain what
dandelion.
that is? A Three
I'm
Sisters
sorry,
garden? Could you explain
the
what the three, because it's not three sisters as far like in terms of the Franciscan sisters, it refers to something else.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. Three Sisters Garden is an indigenous method of gardening that includes a hilling method with growing corn or maize, beans, and squash, because the three plants have a symbiotic relationship with nutrients that grow well together. So Henry and the Ho Chunk Nation had traditional squash, corn, and beans that they had to grow with the students. And we did very simplified methods working with the students, a small plot. And then what was grown was then brought back into the youth center. The students then worked with UW Extension and their own Ho Chunk dietitians and cultural pathways staff members to then prepare meals. And it was just kind of reincorporated into food that would have been prepared hundreds of years ago had those methods been allowed to practice if their families were not torn apart with policies of the federal government. So it's a real coming around and circling back around to what could have been in these very lands in the driftless region.
So it sounds to me like going back a little bit, you were talking about, the sisters have this land that they're trying to figure out how to best what its best future is, right? For lack of a better term. And it brings up this idea that there's a real difference between how, land visitors and outdoor folks, enthusiasts, what they think about the land and how they use it versus those who actually own the land and the decisions that they make for their property in the future. And how do those two talk to each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I'm out hiking with my family, um, I would always take for granted until recently the property that we were on, whether it be the Ice Age Trail or a state park or, a friend's property in the Driftless region. And knowing that it was public land, we would we would go. If we needed a permit, we would go and have that permit. And since studying about land justice, I have learned to understand and do my own research as to whose land we are originally on. So, as a family, I now take time to do some research, and whether we're in Colorado or Trempealeau County, I want to understand whose land we're on and be respectful of that, and to be aware, but also if we're paying a permit fee for a state park, why shouldn't I pay a permit fee to those that held that land in care many, many years ago? Because it's their land that I'm on, and they cared for it for thousands of years before we got there. And so I think the difference is we take it for granted as outdoor enthusiasts as to who cared for the land before the most recent property owner. And it's an opportunity to kind of deeply connect to the spaces and places. And it's an opportunity to also understand a little bit more about the history of who and what neighbors are still there, and how we might treat each other when we're there. Being able to offer opportunities to share a space and think about the ways in which we use it differently, even between daytime and nighttime. If we think about the dark sky movement, and also having lit parking lots so that our campers can get, safely to their cars, for example. Um, it's a better awareness, I think, but it's also understanding that we have a lot to learn about a place, and it's like not judging a book by its cover.
Hmm. So how can our listeners and our audience support this work? Your work or others when it comes to land justice? When you've talked
Yeah,
about, knowing, just having awareness of whose land it was. Um, what else can we do?
yeah. There are a few there's a few websites that I would recommend people start at. And one of them, to kind of understand where they might be, is a great website called nativeland.ca. So it's NATIVE hyphen LAND.ca.
And we'll have all this in our blog post as well with this
Okay.
video, so we'll make sure our audience gets it.
Okay, so native land gives you a globe, and then you can kind of zoom in to wherever you're going to go, and you can see the different layers of who has been on that land, but then you can also see the treaties that have been part of that land. And I think that's really important, because the treaties are what essentially the government in the United States, at least, That's what they use to take the land from the native peoples and essentially give us as white people access to that land and that privilege to that land. And that is one of my key places that I go to kind of learn whose land I'm on, as my family and I might go around the country for summer vacations. That's been a really key website that we tend to go to. Another great site that we've used with FSPA is one that has a lot of tutorials and a lot of great information, including information from way back in the beginning with talk about the doctrine of discovery, which is a heavy document from the global Catholic Church way back saying, go and conquer lands, take them over. And that was even used in the US Supreme Court to kind of justify taking over lands. But that website and the organization that I've learned from is called Land Justice Futures, all one word, .org. And that has some really great information. And again, some videos and some courses that you can take for free to learn about land justice. And then if you are interested in boarding school information, and the Toma Hospital, I believe, was a boarding school previously, and it's not just the Catholics that ran boarding schools for the federal government. There were Methodists, there were Lutherans that were running boarding schools. So it's really important to kind of understand that history. There's a North American boarding school association to kind of unwrap where and how those schools and the trauma that was induced because of those schools, that's there. But then also there's also opportunities to just, if you Google land justice and conservation or land equity, you will find a ton of information. And some really great examples are from one organization that's primarily working out of California, and it's called the Center for the Center for Ethical Land Transfer. And their group that has worked on all of the examples and even more technical support to others that want to do examples of land transfers to get land back in the hands of the BIPOC community.
That's okay. So thank you for those resources. Absolutely.
Yep.
What do you think, like, in your, let's fast forward 50 years. What does success look like in the land justice movement? And maybe if you want to, because that's a big question, right? So maybe even if you just want to bring it down to the efforts that you've been involved with locally here with FSPA, what does success look like 50 years from now?
Well, Casey, when you talk about the Good Life Goals, and we have the opportunity to amplify voices, and we've talked about the solutions are there with like Project Drawdown. I think in 50 years we understand with the lens of land justice and the knowledge that has been there for so many years from the Black and Indigenous communities and conservation efforts that have been very, traditional and steadfast, that we need to go back to those methods and understand that it's also there. Like, we know what we need to do, and we just have to kind of remember that there is abundance in the land if we can take out the concept that we have to hold it tight and be protective of it. And if we can find a way to look at it as an opportunity to share in that abundance. One of the books I just started reading and I'm really hooked right now is The Serviceberry with Robin Wall Kimmerer. So I see that as like the future. And you know, when you're teaching a little kid, like, okay, you got to share. I just see that as where we need to go, and kind of thinking of, we can't take it with us when we die. So how do we find a way to put it towards use for the greater good with a larger community in mind? So if it's property planning with women religious, and looking ahead that it's available for others, for those dispossessed communities, if it's looking at land transfers to Indigenous communities that have had those lands taken from them, if it's opportunities to build relationships with communities, I think that is where we need to go in 50 years. But the groundwork in the study is happening now, and we're gonna get there. It's just gonna be a lot of education, and it's gonna be a lot of breaking down of the silos, and it's gonna be resistance, but we're gonna go around those boulders and we're gonna get there.
Awesome. So that leads into my final question is, what brings you hope? You know, we've talked about a lot of dark things. I mean, boarding schools, right? And dispossession of land and colonization. So that's some heavy work. What brings you hope?
What brings me hope is when my own children, who are 3 white kids, are comfortable in the woods with anyone, but they're also comfortable protecting the environment because they know it's good for everyone, but they can talk about the racism and the inequality because they know that the kids that they've met at the Ho-Chunk Nation experience that racism when they are on the trails in our own city. That gives me hope. What gives me hope is when there are organizations that extend an invitation and find opportunities to bridge experiences, whether it be cross-country skiing or fishing, and break down those barriers so that all kids can have access, and that if the kids love a place, they want to take care of it. And that brings me hope. So when those kids come together as adults, they can do great things, and that brings me hope.
Terrific. That is a wonderful place to end. So we've been talking land justice with Beth Piggush, a sustainability expert extraordinaire in the La Crosse area. So Beth, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for all the work that you've done. It is hard work, but it is important work. And you have made this place, along with the people that you work with, better. So thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Casey. Thanks for the opportunity.
To stay connected with the Sustainability Institute and stay aware of upcoming events, head on over to our website to join our mailing list. Once again, we want to thank you for watching this Sustainability Chat. We hope to see you soon.